Hi, everyone. Hoping that you all are doing well. We're going to be addressing the topic of Babylon and the men of sin. You might have noticed how frequently individuals, particularly religious scholars and some lay people, will refer to America as Babylon as if Iraq, which is the original Babylon according to the narrative, has been superimposed onto America. They never seem to really tell you how they came to the conclusion that America is Babylon. We're going to talk about, however, how Babylon has been superimposed onto America, and part of it is due to invasion. And this invasion is coming from the sons of Babylon. So we're going to talk about this lineage that is tied to Babylon that's not always made clear. And part of this is covered by our topic today, which is suppression for our Freudian Minutes. And so we're going to talk just very briefly about the dynamic of suppression and how it plays into things not being made clear about history, about religion, about scripture. Suppression is yet another defense mechanism, and it is definitely tied to this dynamic of not addressing or being upfront about the various men of sin. So there's this reference to the man of sin, but we have men of sin, and they come from a particular lineage according to the narrative. And so, with respect to suppression, what we have is a conscious avoidance to keep something out of consciousness. And so, it's known. If you read scripture, you can see it right there. If you deconstruct it, you can see it right there. However, there are efforts made to avoid addressing what's right in front of our faces related to the men of sin. Now, part of the suppression dynamic comes from this dynamic wherein we have been conditioned to elevate or exalt or revere or worship that which comes from this entity that is identified in scripture as the man of sin or the men of sin. But you see manifestations of this man of sin in terms of naming in a number of historic people groups. And it's coming from EBER or ABER, but it's also coming before you get to EBER and ABER. And once we look at where it's coming from in that Shem lineage, this will make better sense. But you see the manifestations with that BER. So Aberians, Eberians, Hiberians, Iberians, Liberians, Siberians, Tiberians, and Berberians. Mm-hmm. And so this elder man of sin is this entity known as ARPHAXAD. What's interesting about this is that this is not necessarily the way that this name is supposed to be understood in terms of the way it's pronounced. And because of that, it creates a little bit of confusion and people don't have clarity about what's really going on with this particular name. And so this is an ancestor of Eber or Aber, an ancestor of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and everyone that came after. And so what we have is this name, ARPHAXAD, but we're going to look a little deeper so that we can see who ARPHAXAD really is and what this name is really all about and why it is actually concealing this identity of the man of sin. And here you can see there are different ways to spell ARPHAXAD. What you see here is this lineage. And so you see it coming down from Shem and then identifying Shem as the father of all of the children of Aber. And so it's sort of cutting to the chase, making sure that you know very quickly that before even getting into the lineage, that Shem is the daddy for all of these entities, including this ARPHAXAD. And as we go through the lineage, we see that EBER is listed here, and he is the father of two sons. One son is Peleg, and the other one is Joktan. What's interesting about this is that there's a notation about this Peleg, and it indicates, for in his days was the earth divided. And so it's suggesting here that prior to this person being born, that the earth was unified. And during his time on earth, the earth became divided. It's an interesting notation here. Now, what's fascinating about this name, ARPHAXAD, is the meaning of it is concealed. You see this with a number of names in scripture where when you look at Strong's or you look at the discussions about the name, there is this indication that there's no clarity about the origin of the name. There's no understanding of the meaning of the name. They don't know the etymology of the name. And this is one of those situations where when you are first looking at it, you may not readily find the information you need about the meaning of this particular name. And part of that is because part of the name is being concealed with the spelling. And we're going to see that in the King James, how the King James uses a different spelling. And by using that different spelling, it doesn't jump out at you exactly what's going on with this particular name. So we have this ARPHAXAD for this pronunciation. And it's indicating here in this Hitchcock Bible Names Dictionary, not immediately in Strong's, but in here, that this ARPHAXAD means a healer or a releaser. Also, this is a location that's identified as the stronghold of the Chaldeans. Now, we talked about who the Chaldeans are. And so this is very important. And so you're seeing that the stronghold of the Chaldeans it has the same name as this ancestor of EBER, this ancestor of Abraham, this ancestor of Isaac and Jacob and the rest of the crew. So it goes on to indicate that this is the son of Shem and the ancestor of EBER again. Also, this person is named as one of the kings that reigned over the Medes. Now, in looking at this idea of ARPHAXAD being related to a healer, one might ask, how? What about that word suggests healer? Well, there's something very interesting apparently going on here, and it is the introduction of an anagram. Surprise, surprise. And so when you look at the anagram of this ARPHAXAD, you do come up with healer, because what you come up with the alpha part before the sad or the shad, what you come up with in terms of the anagram is Rapha. And we've already discussed Rapha before, and Rapha is supposed to mean healer, but as you know, Rapha also means something different. And so basically what you have with ARPHAXAD, meaning this healer or restore, is the Rapha Shad or the Rapha Sad. Now, they don't make it very easy for you to find this, of course, but if you go out of the Strong's series and go into this Bible study tools source, what you see is ARPHAXAD as a healer and releaser, and then you see Rapha. And you can see very clearly that Rapha is to heal. And this comes about, again, based upon this anagram. It's really interesting, this dynamic of anagrams in terms of digging into these histories. there's a slight suggestion that perhaps this is intentional because it's very odd how you have so many words that mean one thing going in one direction, and if you flip it around, it means the same thing. Things like muir and room, or Rome and more, Amor and Roma. You can see all of these similarities, where the anagram just means the same thing no matter how you arrange it. And so you see this oddity going on here. And then again, Rapha has this very obscured meaning also, and it's not as wholesome as what is being presented here. And we've discussed that before. And so here you see additional information about ARPHAXAD. It indicates here, again, reiterating, this person is a son of Shem, born, according to this narrative, the year after the deluge. This person lived for a very long time. This person also dwelt in Mesopotamia and became, according to the Jewish historian Josephus, the progenitor of the Chaldeans. And so the progenitor of the Chaldeans is also the progenitor of Eber, the progenitor of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the rest of the crew. And so there's a suggestion, a belief that this name, ARPHAXAD, is really some sort of variation of Chaldee or Chazdim. And this is, again, related to of the Chaldees. And remember, this is a part of Abraham's history. And so this particular family is very much tied to Babylon. And so naturally, one would expect as these individuals traveled around that they took a little bit of Babylon with them. The Babylonians were their family members. And so we tend to focus on them being something else. However, there is this serious tie and lineage related to Babylon. So wherever they go, then Babylon would go. And here you can see it's 775 Strong's. Strong's doesn't want to give the story away related to ARPHAXAD's history or ARPHAXAD's name. And so it indicates that it's not quite sure about the origin of this name, possibly Assyrian or Babylonian. Okay. That makes sense because there is a suggestion that this Seth or this Set is really coming out of Babylon and then being superimposed onto Egypt or Mizraim, okay? Because Egypt wasn't actually called Egypt back then. Okay, so it indicates here, and you might even see it immediately, that the pronunciation is ARPHAXAD. Now this, of course, is important because when you see SHAD, you see something that varies from XAD. And so it should jump out at you, the other part of ARPHAXAD's name. And this is where you see King James doing something clever. So you can see that there's this ARPHAXAD up above and below. But the King James chooses ARPHAXAD versus that SHAD. And so therefore it is obscuring the identity of this ARPHAXAD. And so we don't see that SHAD to let us know that we are talking about somebody very specific in terms of this naming dynamic. And here you see in this encyclopedia this discussion about the element of that name with that SHAD, the SHAT suggestion, and this growing belief that this name is really coming out of or related to Khazdi or the Chaldeans. And of course, if you recall, we've looked at this name so many times. This is Set's name. Yes, Set yet again. It is just unbelievable how pervasive Set is. Set's just everywhere. Everywhere you go, there is Set. And here you can see this deconstruction of it and the relationship between this ARPHAXAD and this Khazdi or Chaldee. And you see that there's another variation possible, Keshad or Kashad, but it's not completely clear. So it goes on to indicate yet again that this is the grandfather of Eber, and he's also the ancestor for Terah or Terah, also Nahor and Abraham again, and Isaac and Ishmael and Jacob and company. And here you see this pointing out a belief that this individual, this ARPHAXAD, is in the lineage of Shem and therefore also in the lineage of the entity known as Jesus in the New Testament. I can just imagine someone saying this to the entity known as Jesus, and Jesus saying, "Depart from me, you workers of iniquity." Okay, so here we have additional information about this name, and something else stands out, that there's a suggestion that it's related to this idea of a wall. And if you recall, we talked about the entities that are identified with this construct of a wall. And here you see additional transliterations, and it's in the transliterations that you see the truth about this name. And so you see repeatedly the SAD, the SAD, the SHAD. And what was also interesting when looking at the initial presentation of the word in Strong's is that it has the arphax part and then shad in all capital letters. And so there is some indication that there is an effort being made to alert you to the essence of this actual name. But you can see it very clearly here when you look at the forms and transliterations. You don't see that X. You see the reality of what this word really is. Now, interesting when you first look at the first translation, it's coming out of the Yiddish. It's unclear how this even happens, because clearly they were not speaking Yiddish back then. But so what you have here is an indication going into, because we have to go back and forth between the Yiddish and the Hebrew to get to the essence of this. So we go into the Hebrew with this. What is being said here? And we see that in the Hebrew, the ARPHAXAD. And so that lets you know right there what this is all about. And we go back from the Hebrew into the Yiddish to see if the construct continues to hang together, and it does. And so you see the shed and the shad. Oh, and this is when it gets real. So you can see going back from the Yiddish into the Hebrew again, this arpek, and that second part being shaitan. And here you see the translations and the transliterations related to the Hebrew and the Yiddish going into the English, and you see very clearly what that shad or shed is all about. And it indicates in the English DEVIL and SATAN. And so that's the essence of this ARPHAXAD name. And of course, it's consistent with the rest of this Babylonian narrative that's going with it. And here we see it reiterated coming from the Hebrew into the English, the SATAN. And so as we wrap this up, you can see very clearly that in this ancestral line, going back to the deluge, we have this entity that is understood as the ultimate man of sin. And so we have this individual again with this set name, this Shad name for this particular lineage. And it perhaps helps with understanding or better understanding this grandchild named Eber, who essentially has a name that means sin. And so Eber, when you finish deconstructing it, and we can look at that, when you finish deconstructing it, what you have is a name, Eber, Aber, Abarim, all of those names, they essentially mean trespass. They mean transgress. And the other word for transgress is sin. And so, what has descended upon various parts of the earth, including the land space now known as America, is a descending by the descendants of this entity known as ARPHAXAD, this entity known as EBER or ABER, and all of the variations of it. And so when you have Babylon migrate into the Americas, well, then it stands to reason that Babylon would be in the Americas. But it doesn't mean that the original inhabitants of the Americas were consistent with this idea of Babylon. Remember, knowledge is power. Take care. And this concludes our Freudian Minutes. I believe this is episode 5.